All right, everybody. Let's start making our way to seats and getting ready to do some high-performance stuff. Hey, can y'all hear me? Let's start taking seats. Let's get ready to rock. Hey, everybody. How are you? How are levels, Aaron? Can you hear me? Do you need me to lean into the mic? We're good. Okay. Louder. Okay. I'm just gonna get shorter because I think I'm taller than everybody except Andrew. Okay. So, hello. My name's Jason. I am DevRel at Gatsby, also known as a developer avocado for those of you who like Twitter jokes. So, what we wanted to do today is the Gatsby team has been in Portland for the last week. We're planning kind of what's next for Gatsby, and we wanted that to kind of wrap up in a big night with the community. We're super excited to share the stuff we've been working on. Gatsby version 2, for those of you who have been following, just hit its first release candidate earlier this week, which means that Gatsby version 2 is imminent, which I wasn't part of that at all, so I'm going to applaud for the open source team. Good job, you guys. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to work with the Jamstack Portland Meetup. Thank you, Colin, for putting this on. Their banner here. And we're working with Alchemy Code Lab, who's done an excellent job. Let me switch over and show this. Oh, my God. Just kidding. 1 second. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Oh, no. So many things are going so wrong. It's all happening. Oh, no. Oh, it's getting dark in a hurry. I've got one that I stole from Dave Neal. Oh. What do you call a moose with carrots in its ears? Whatever you want. It can't hear you. That was a joke for me. So thank you very much to Alchemy Code Lab for lending us the space. We're going to have Marty up here in a minute to give a little bit of a spiel about what they do and what they stand for. But in the meantime, just thank you from the bottom of our hearts for giving us your space on such short notice. We really, really appreciate it. And a little heads up on a upcoming workshop. Women Who Code Portland is going to be working with us to put on a high-performance website workshop. And we're going to be doing that here at Alchemy on September 15th. And it's going to be an all-day workshop. It's $10 to attend, but we do have scholarships available. So if you are interested in attending, look for the invite that's going to go out. It's going to be on meetup.com. And if you need a scholarship, please apply. We're also having our live streaming sponsored by Okta, as well as the beer and LaCroix. So thank you very much to Okta for putting that together. And then, Aaron, did you want to say a couple words about Okta? Or let me just get out of the way.
Yeah, hi. I'm Aaron from Okta. Okta is basically a way to never have to build auth again. I like talking about auth. I like dealing with that stuff myself. But I know that for most people who are actually just trying to build an app, it's like the last thing you want to deal with. So Okta is basically just, it's a user database, has APIs to deal with authentication, logging people in, dealing with the password reset flows and account recovery and all that. So check it out, developer.okta.com. It will save you a lot of time in the end. And yeah, I also have a couple of books I wrote about OAuth if you're interested in learning more about how it all works under the hood. I do talks about OAuth at meetups as well, and I have a couple of these books which we'll give away at the end of the evening. So thanks a bunch.
Okay, now that Marty's at the front of the room, do you want to come up and talk about Alchemy for a second?
Hey everyone, I'm Marty. I'm the CEO here at Alchemy Code Lab. We exist to advance human potential through code. The main way we do that is we help bright and curious people looking to transition into a career in technology as software developers. We have an immersive, intensive 20-week course. One of the things that's really exciting about the work we do that I love is we also have spent a lot of time over the last few years developing relationships with Women Who Code Portland, Hispanic pros, and other groups that enables us to get underrepresented people into tech, which is super exciting. So if you know anybody, woo! Yeah. And you know, we do, as I mentioned, we have a very intensive program. We really focus on trying to create the best software developers, so it's very process heavy, very focused on the work product. And because of that, we are able to get people jobs as contributors in the field. And I think combining that with our pulling people in through diversity is really exciting to get people, women, people of color into the field, starting out at a higher level than just coming in through internships and apprenticeships. So very exciting. We also love JavaScript, and we like React too. And so welcome to Gatsby, and have fun.
Okay, and quick little details about our sponsor, Cloudflare, who picked up the pizza tonight. For those of you who haven't heard of Cloudflare, Cloudflare is a very easy way to get SSL and higher performance for your website. It's used for all of these wonderful figures. The one that blows me away is 10% of internet requests every day, which is a lot of internet requests. What it does is it basically blocks attackers from getting to your website by putting up a kind of known list. They do a lot of things that are very smart to ensure that your site doesn't get taken down by DDoS or malicious users. They also have a ton of apps that you can apply at the edge. They've got these amazing things that I'm going to get the name of wrong, and I'm so sorry to Cloudflare, but it's like edge workers or something. It's kind of like a service worker at the edge. It's amazing. Very, very powerful stuff that you can do there. And it looks like you can go over there to this URL on the side and get some free things. So Cloudflare is free to start, which I would highly recommend if you've got a personal website. Throw it up there like immediately because it's wonderful. But if you need to go a little bit beyond that, it looks like you can get some dollars to get you rolling. So thank you very much to Cloudflare for picking up the pizza. And yeah, we'll give them a little round of applause. And with that being said, we're going to bring up our first speaker. We're going to have Kyle Matthews, who is the creator of Gatsby and the co-founder of Gatsby Incorporated. And he also pays my checks. So let's give him an extra big round of applause. And come on, Kyle.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Hello, friends. Static site generator, but kind of a full-blown CMS replacement. And particularly, they wanted to use Gatsby as like the presentation layer. This got me excited because, you know, I'd done Drupal and I'd built these like complicated websites, you know, with all sorts of like content types and interrelationship between models and whatever, and lots of clicking around the Drupal UI, if you've ever done that. Anyways, so it was good times, and I was like, oh, like sweet, like we can build similar types of stuff as that, but use React, which is a much more pleasant, you know, kind of site building experience, and you know, have much faster, you know, site performance due to you know, Gatsby kind of piling in a lot of kind of performance optimizations, and having everything, you know, done on React on the client side. So kind of how I started to conceptualize this is that the traditional monolithic CMS, it has this presentation layer and then kind of a content backend. And so you model your content, the content backend, and content editors and marketers, whoever, are adding content, editing content, and so forth. And then you have this presentation layer, which is like PHP templates of some sort or another generally, or some other language, whatever, you know, the CMS is written in, that you then kind of design your HTML, and you can like add in CSS and JavaScript and so forth. But they're like glued together. It's a monolith. But then you have this idea of like a decoupled CMS, where the CMS, like the content management part, is now headless. Like it just doesn't present anything, it doesn't present the site itself. And then you have this like presentation layer which pulls data somehow from the CMS. So now the CMS is generally exposing this content over an API, and then you build the site in however other fashion you'd like, which is great for all sorts of reasons. Because you have a lot more flexibility, of course. You can also do multimodal content, so use it in your mobile app or whatever. So it has a lot of flexibility when you decouple. So people were basically saying, we want to use Gatsby, as this presentation layer and connect to CMSs or even other data sources. So I was like, okay, cool, but how do we do that? How do we bridge the gap? Like we have React components and we need to get data into the React components, but how do you kind of like thread the needle, take the content and, and get it all the way, the right content to the right place at the right time sort of thing. Because that's a pretty big part of programming, is getting data to the right place. Anyways, it's silly, but that's all we do. So the solution I eventually came up with was called, it was just source plugins in GraphQL. So for each data source, you could create a plugin which would know how to get that data into Gatsby. And then with GraphQL, you could add a GraphQL query to your components so that you could specify on a per component basis, like, hey, we have all this data that we've made available, and for this particular component, this is the data that I need. And then Gatsby would just sort of magically, glue things together. And so now we have like all the advantages of a decoupled CMS, where it's very easy to kind of swap out, the different data sources, or even had multiple data sources. But we don't have this awkward, like, how do we get the data into our components, into our site? Because the build time GraphQL that's built into Gatsby would just sort of make a seamless glue between the decoupled layers. And so that's what went into V1 at Gatsby, which was released just over a year ago, July 2017. And yeah, so now you pick a CMS, you install the source plugin for that CMS, and then you can write, start writing GraphQL queries, and your React components are glued to the data from your CMS. So this kind of example of what a component would look like, where up top you have a React component like normal, and then down below you have a GraphQL query, and then you can see that it has like you're querying HTML front, and then like the title and the front matter, and then up top it has like an H1. You put the title there, and then in the div you put the HTML. Yeah, so this actually slide's a little bit outdated. It's actually over 100 plus plugins now for different sources that we have. So yeah, so now there's 422 total Gatsby plugins. This includes a number of other things other than just source plugins. But yeah, it's like, the community has been very active in kind of creating plugins to meet all these different needs. So oftentimes now you're like, hey, I want to build a site. I want to do this and this and this. And there's already plugins that are available to make that really straightforward. So yeah, so strong community growth since V1. GitHub stars has been growing really fast. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of new contributors. Like the last few months, it's been averaging 80 to 100 plus PRs per week, which is a lot of PRs. Even if it doesn't sound like it, you have to read every one and like click merge and everyone. It takes a while. So Twitter love. Made this website with GatsbyJS. I'm totally in love with it. React static site generators are the future. Super excited about the next version of GatsbyJS, the first GraphQL-powered static site generator as far as I know. Really loving GatsbyJS tutorials and documentation. Seems like the perfect balance of depth and getting started quickly. My word in GatsbyJS is impressive. The sort of thing that's so well done you want to make up reasons to use it. However, preposterous. And I include that tweet just for the word preposterous, which is a really nice word. And then, a Twitter comment, yeah. We actually get that comment a lot. Well, not specifically this comment, which is like a nice rendition of it, but just people are like, sort of like, the site's too fast. They're like, it's like, it almost feels wrong. It's like, sites shouldn't change that way. It's unnatural. Something like that. Yeah, a lot of people like to post screenshots of their Lighthouse scores. So yeah. So we're seeing on Twitter people just telling us about it. There's tons of great websites being built in Gatsby. So this was a candidate for governor. I don't know. Did he win? Or has it, I don't know. Yeah. I hope he won. Figma. So Figma is a kind of a modern design tooling company. They actually relaunched their website on it too. I don't think we have it in the slides, but this is also a little microsite that they built. That's really cool. Some really interesting kind of navigation patterns that they have. EdgeDB. This is a cool e-commerce company. Code Sandbox. Tinder is a website, microsite. StitchFix.com. They relaunched last week, I think, on Gatsby. And then also, as you might have heard, Gatsby's now a company. So that's why we're here. Yeah. So, and who here's actually, I should ask, who here has like launched a website in Gatsby? Okay, like half the crowd. Is there anyone who hasn't tried Gatsby? Because I can just skip the whole getting started. Okay, there's a handful. Okay. Okay. No, that's cool. It's cool. You're among friends. We won't look down on you or something. Anyway, so yeah, so getting started with Gatsby is really easy. There's like a CLI that you install. So you need Node, then you install CLI, and then you just type Gatsby new and the name of your site, and then presto changeo, you have a site. I'll show that off in a bit. Then there's also getting started tutorial, which we put a lot of time into making it, very friendly to people new to React or even new to programming. And so generally, you go through the tutorial if you're new to Gatsby, and you should be pretty well set up to start doing stuff. And some Twitter love about the tutorial, so beginner friendly. And skip that slide. Yeah, so as Jason mentioned earlier, we just released the first RC on Monday. Here's us hard at work at Jason's house here in Portland. Yeah, so wanted to talk a bit about V2. So V2 has part new features and part kind of upstream updates. So as you might know, Gatsby is built on a lot of really impressive JavaScript open source tools. We rely on Webpack, we rely on Babel, and we rely on React, of course. And so Gatsby 2 has kind of updates from our upstreams. So we went from Webpack 1 to Webpack 4, React 15 to 16, and Babel 6 to 7, which have like tons of awesome new features, some of which I'll go into here. Also, we're really excited about guest.js, which is something that we collaborated on with Google and some open source people, which is basically guest.js is this really interesting idea where it integrates with your Google Analytics data. And so Google Analytics, of course, knows how people go through your site. If you land on one page, they know which other page you're going to go to. And because of that, we can use that analytic data to drive prefetching of pages that, through the analytic data that we know people are going to visit, which, speeds up your site pretty dramatically, even beyond, of course, the speed that Gatsby already gives you. Also, this is a fun optimization we did. So we sped up, so when you're editing Markdown, it's actually pretty much real time to making a change to having that saved change show up in your. So let me play it again in case you missed it. This was actually Mike made this demo here. So yeah, go Mike. Anywho, yeah. So I'm going to jump into some live coding, but before that, you have any questions so far? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so the question was what got me into web performance? And, well, basically nothing, because to me it's like, like a site should be fast. It's like if you're, you know, a plumber, like your pipe shouldn't leak, and I don't know. Sure. Oh, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, for a lot of websites, it kind of sort of doesn't matter. Maybe. I mean, some people are like, "Hey, we got stuff on the page, and it says things and whatever." But I mean, I've done a lot of like app stuff, you know, where performance matters a ton, and you know, I don't know, I build websites and I like measuring things. So it's just sort of a natural like, hey, how fast is the site? And like, oh, I can make it faster. And how do you make it faster? And so to me, it's like just sort of a natural thing. But yeah, where some. Sorry, what? Yeah, so yeah, where for some people it just doesn't seem to matter too much. Yeah, sorry, what was your question? Uh-huh. Oh, version 0. You guys are, wow. Yeah. You're one of the few people that used it, so that's cool. You're one of the few people that used it, yeah. 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 Yeah, you're number 0.
One of the things that stopped us from really using it there, and
Uh-huh.
something that you've addressed in 1 and 2,
Uh-huh.
is the glue layer between the headless CMS, so
Uh-huh.
using something, say, Contentful.
Uh-huh.
So when we have a site with multiple authors
Right.
all digging away on their CMSs, you know,
Sure, yeah.
and making, I don't know, you know, 10, 20 edits an hour,
Right.
things like that, oftentimes they're going to want to do other operations like save and preview.
Right.
And that requires an entire site rebuild.
Right.
Because you can't do live Ajax. I mean, the
Right.
whole point is to not do live Ajax.
Right.
To get your data. So how do you address scale when you're talking about things like that?
Yeah. So question was, you know, you have sites that data is changing all the time. How do you address that? I mean, because obviously Gatsby is a quote unquote static site generator. So if anything changes, you have to rebuild it. So I mean, there's a few ways to think about that. One is like automating the rebuilds. It makes it, you know, automatic. So.
Essentially, we ended up doing was basically just saying, you know, when you hit this, it churns away for a while and locks everyone. You know.
Oh, okay.
And basically, no one else can hit that button while it's going.
Uh-huh.
You know, it'll queue other things.
Yeah.
But that's a terrible UI, or sorry, UX.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, there's services that aren't so lucky, if you will, that can like, you know, handle that more gracefully, so it doesn't feel like such a broken experience. But generally speaking, though, so if you think about it, it's like how do things, you know, you have CMS, and then things are live on the internet. For most people, it's a little bit hazy. You know, what's the connection between those two? For good reason, because it's actually often quite complicated what's really happening when you like save something and then somehow or another it ends up on the website. But for most people though, regardless of how complicated it can be, and in many organizations it's very complicated, the process, as long as it happens reasonably quickly, as far as they're concerned, I click save and then it's on the website, and yay, I'm changing the website. And so for us, it's all a matter of how do we make the build step, you know, effectively disappear, so that, you know, for most people, again, you click save, and then they refresh their browser, and they're like, yay, my change is there. Anyway, so that's largely actually why we're a company, is to solve that problem, because Gatsby is designed in such a way that we can, you know, make the build step disappear. We're working on, you know, a solution for that exact problem, because that's a big limitation to many people using Gatsby, is that, you know, when you try to introduce Gatsby to non-technical people, they're like, hey, my experience is broken now because I click save, and then like who knows when it's going to show up. You know, it's going to show up at some point in the future, but it doesn't feel like instant like a CMS would. But you know, again, if we can eliminate that build step and automate it, you know, as far as they're concerned, you know, they save and it's live, and then they're happy. But yeah, I mean that's a big bottleneck for many people using Gatsby right now, for sure. Cool. other questions? And yeah, okay.
For you, why is Gatsby named Gatsby?
Why is Gatsby named Gatsby? It's a cool name. No, yeah, DJ Gatsby. Yeah, no, no, I don't know. I just I like books. I like literature, and so I went searching for cool people and cool characters in books, and Gatsby's my favorite, and nobody taken it, so there you go. Yeah. Other questions, Benny? Yeah. Why the screen froze? Oh, that's too bad. Well, that doesn't help my demos. Yeah, it's got like a long lag. Yeah. Well, was it doing this earlier when I was switching slides? Or is this? Yeah. Yeah, this is like 5-6 seconds behind. Huh. Well, maybe I won't show a demo then. I just got a new Mac and it's already super slow. It's depressing. Okay. Here, maybe I'll unplug. I'll turn it off and on again. Oh, wow. It's unplugged and it's still up there. Well, Yeah. Yeah.
TypeScript is the new hotness. When is Gatsby getting TypeScript?
We have TypeScript. No. TypeScript's cool. We have TypeScript, so there's a plugin for TypeScript. So you install that and then you have TypeScript support. Yeah. Often, pretty much anything you want to do, you can just yeah, it's really slow. Sorry, what? Oh, okay. Sorry, what? Yeah. You. Sorry, what? Actually, wait a second. Oh, that's odd. Actually, I'll just skip that. So yeah, so a few other notable changes in V2. I spent a week or so working on improving build speed, and found a bunch of places to speed things up. So kind of highlight is we have this like a benchmark. Where'd it go? Yeah, so I built a benchmark site, and then in this isn't even V1. This was like just before the beta, before this PR landed. It built in. Oh, it's just gone now. Yeah. So it built in a minute 36 for like 5,000 pages, and then after the PR, it built in 28 seconds. And then a Markdown site, same like 5,000 pages of Markdown, built in 9 minutes and 15 seconds, then 45 seconds. So it's a more startling improvement. But yeah, so that was really fun just to go through and find different places where we are kind of unintentionally making builds slower. And so Gatsby is much more sprightly for larger sites. Along with that, we followed that PR up with a kind of multi-core support for builds, for page building. So if you have a machine with multiple cores, it can parallelize, the builds across all your cores. And so anyway, so that can speed up your site considerably as well, the site builds. We added support for Babel plugin macros, which is cool if you're into that. So what's this? That's not what I was wanting to. Who's here heard of Reach Router? Has anyone heard of that? Oh, okay, wow, a lot of you, okay. Yeah, so Reach Router is a replacement for React Router. React Router is what we used in V1, and then we changed. So the same author of React Router built Reach Router because he wanted first-class support for accessibility, and he also wanted first-class support for React Suspense, which some of you might have heard about as well. Anyway, so Reach Router, so we switched to Reach Router just to take advantage of that, because those are two things that we're very excited about as well. We switched to Mini CSS Extract plugin, which is, the long and the short of it is with Webpack, we now have support for async CSS. So you can have different pages that have their own CSS, and those get lazy loaded as you kind of go around the site, which is quite nifty to keep things slim and tidy. That's complicated. Anywho, so any other V2 stuff I should talk about? Sorry, what? From V0? Oh, layouts. Yeah. I was like, haven't heard that term around for a while. So, no, yeah. Those were the good old days. So in V1 we had this idea of this global layout file, and Jason here actually wrote a nice article about this. Life after layouts. So anyway, so it turned out that layouts proved more complicated than they were worth. That's odd. And so my computer is fixing. Anyway, so we decided to remove them, and so layouts were the special component that kind of existed above the page hierarchy of components, and it proved really messy to work with, and so we removed them. They were just confusing. Though there is now a Gatsby plugin layout, which does restore the same V1 behavior if you need it for a few specific reasons. But generally speaking, you don't need it. Yeah. Other questions? Cool. So the main thing we're thinking about V3 is just different ways to add support for faster, more scalable builds. So we're really focused on, kind of like I was talking about earlier, about making builds disappear. And to do that will require some changes to Gatsby, some core Gatsby APIs. And so we're working through figuring out exactly what those will be. But our goal with V3 is that basically unlimited size site. We'll support any size site. So even like a 1 million page site, we could build that in a few minutes, sort of thing. Sorry, what? Gatsby Enterprise. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Cool. We'll have more presentation about more V2 stuff, and we'll be around afterwards. But yeah, it's nice talking to you all. Yeah, pull this out.
Okay, so that was great. Sorry about the weirdness with the feed. We're not quite sure what's going on with it, but we are looking into it. Aaron's doing his best, and thanks for sticking with us, especially everybody who's watching online. Next up, we are going to have, who's next? Marissa Morby. She's going to talk about the process that we've been following for different things. I am so prepared, can you tell? So something to keep in mind, everybody who's here tonight, we want to give you some swag. So please stick around after the talks. Come see us over here. We've got a bunch of stickers, a bunch of t-shirts. We have limited sizes, but even if we don't have your size, we will give you a discount code so that you can get it on our store. So come see us. Marissa, do you want to come set up? Should I tell more jokes that are only funny to me? Here's your thing. Here you go. What do you call a deer with no eyes? No idea. I got one laugh. I'm going to take it. All right, you ready? All right. Here's Marissa Morby, everybody.
I don't know how I can follow that because comedic genius happened just then. Hi, I'm Marissa Morby. It's nice to see you all here. Thanks for coming out. Hi. And what I'm going to be talking about today is making open source more open. So we obviously, Gatsby is all based on GitHub and is out in the open. And one of the things that we've wanted to do is make sure that it's as open and welcoming as possible to people that maybe haven't contributed before ever in open source, or are new to open source, or are just new to Gatsby in general. And so that's something that from the beginning they've wanted to be able to make sure we focus on. And so I'm here today to talk about that, how we have designed some of our processes, what we've learned, and then a little bit about what we're planning on doing. So like I said, from the beginning, we've had lots of contributors. I think Kyle mentioned that, we're just over 1,000 contributors now. And so it's been a great community that has been so active and engaged. They've been helping us to not only do things like fixing the docs and also helping with the code base, but they're also just very engaged in talking to one another, talking with each other and helping. And we've been so fortunate to be able to have a community that is talking to us like this, that's engaged with us, that we really wanted to be able to think, how could we do more? How could we show our appreciation for our community? How could we show them that we valued them and that they were important to us? What could we do to show our appreciation, but also make sure that it's a small team? So how could we do that without overburdening the team in general? And then how could we continue to help the community? So we started with these few questions and decided in a group, what kind of bubbled up surface, what could we do that would be both valuable, show appreciation, and help the community in a cycle, where we are helping one another. We're giving, they're giving, we're giving, they're giving. And the things that bubbled up to the surface were both swag and as many manual touch points as possible. How are we going to do it in a way that we can reach our entire community? We have people that have gotten swag now in over 41 countries, which is pretty amazing. So obviously it's a huge breadth of people, and we wanted to be able to equally show our appreciation. And so we asked these questions, sat down, and talked through it with the team, and came up with a few things. We've learned in asking this that automation is key. So again, how do we remove those manual touch points? How do we make sure that we are guarding for people's time? And how do we ensure that everything we do is also scalable? As we are starting out, there's just a few of us, but a lot of contributors. And as it grows, we're going to get hopefully more and more engagement and more interest and more people. And what that means is we're not going to be able to be in there every day doing things ourselves. So we thought about scalability up front so that we could get that out of the way. We also wanted to make sure that we were balancing this internal visibility and the processes that we have. So as we are creating these things, if we're trying to remove manual touch points in order for swag to go from the very beginning where we've got nothing, all the way through to finding people to fulfill it, to being able to have a place to place orders, to having discount codes, all of that. How do we make sure that the whole team knows what's going on internally, and also all of our contributors know what's happening as well? And so these were some of the things that we learned as we went and had to think about up front as well. And so the last thing that we wanted to do was also keep complexity low. So we didn't want to create a system that we wouldn't be able to manage, and also create a system that then would be too difficult even to start. So specifically for the swag store first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the pair programming. But we used a little bit of flowchart mapping to be able to think through that. And what this is it shows you all of the touch points that technology happens and where those decisions need to be made. How can we then remove us actually having to do something? How can we automate it a little bit more? And so what we've been able to do is create a dashboard that allows people who have contributed to get a code to become a maintainer, and then from there they're directed through this flow that allows them to then order swag for free, and they can get it anywhere in the world, shipped to them. And it creates this positive feedback loop where we're showing our appreciation and also being able to release the burden on some of our team. For pair programming, since we had this same idea, what we decided to do, all we wanted to do at the very beginning was make sure that we were able to get people in and talking to us. And so right now we've got a Calendly invite that's open, and anyone can go in and sign up to do pair programming with some of the team. And it's been fantastic so far. We've gotten some great feedback on that. So we've set that up in the past month or so, couple months, and the result has been quite positive. As you can see, we've done this all just so that we can get pictures of shirts on dogs, but I feel like that's a good effort. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on the pair programming too, seeing a lot of new contributors that maybe we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So as we are thinking about moving forward, obviously this is something that we want to grow. So Kyle talked a little bit about V2, so Flo would probably be terrified if I showed these sketches, but these are some sketches that our amazing designer Flo has come up with. He couldn't be here with us today, and hopefully he's asleep in Europe so that he doesn't yell at me. But these are some amazing designs come up with that we're gonna increase swag, get more stickers out there, have some options for people, and then also thinking about how to expand pair programming to get more people involved, because it's been so wonderful to see the response from everybody, and creating this positive feedback loop just creates such a strong community, not just here, but it's been throughout the world, and it's been really amazing to see. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marissa. And apologies to Flo, who is probably in Germany right now having a nervous breakdown because we showed early versions of his work. Next up, we're going to have another Kyle talking about building a Gatsby blog using Tailwind CSS and Gatsby version 2. So Kyle, if you want to come on up and get set up. Let's see here. Do I have any additional jokes?
Everybody hear me okay? Cool. So my name's Kyle Galbraith. I'm a senior software engineer based out of here in Portland. I also recently put a course together that focuses on learning Amazon Web Services by actually using it. And in the course, we dive into how to host, secure, and deliver static websites on AWS, which is very pertinent to tonight's talk, right, with GatsbyJS. So what I'm going to run through today is really quickly how you can get a Gatsby blog up and running using a starter project that I created that comes pre-configured with Tailwind CSS, which is a utility-first CSS framework. It's super handy for kind of the back-end engineers like me that might not have the design chops of other people. And then we'll quickly explore some of the social sharing and SEO components that are rolled into it. And then I'll demonstrate how you can get it deployed to AWS. And if we have time afterwards, I'll also walk through how you can set up your AWS infrastructure. So, everybody see that okay? So, first thing is you need to get the Gatsby CLI installed. So, as Kyle already talked about, there's fantastic documentation on how you get up and going with GatsbyJS. I'm certainly not an expert like the mainstream contributors here, but it was super easy for me to use and launch a blog in pretty much less than 4 hours. So we'll go ahead and get that installed. And then we can run Gatsby new, and we'll just call this like temp blog. And we're just going to grab this GitHub URL. So we can create Gatsby blogs, Gatsby sites off of starter projects on GitHub. So go ahead and run that. This can take a little bit. So it's going to pull down the dependencies. It's going to package everything up, link it up for us. So because it can take a little bit, I already have one pulled down. So if we go into Meetup blog, we can see there's all of our files for the starter project. We can run Gatsby develop. This will start a hot reloading server on our localhost 8000 so that we can start seeing the changes. So this is loading the plugins, doing the GraphQL queries. And now if we go back to the browser, we can go to localhost 8000. And we see kind of our boilerplate blog here. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to cancel this one. And we'll go into Meetup blog. Let's just open this up in Visual Studio Code really quick. So you see the source directory. We'll talk about the pages in a second. But the interesting bits, so this is using Gatsby v2. It's using the next version. Recently ported over. So that's good. We also see the dev dependency on Tailwind CSS. We have the build CSS script that's running Tailwind build and outputting our custom CSS. So if we go into components, we see there's a header component. And we see it's essentially loading everything in from a config file to author name and site description. So if we go to that config file, we can change this. Change this to Gatsby Meetup. Change site description. Do we have pizza? We do have pizza. Pizza and beer. There's the hot reloading server in action. Now let's change like this footer color. So if we go to the footer component. So right now the outer div has a class of BG Gray Lightus. This is a built-in utility class to Tailwind CSS. There's a ton of colors built into the framework. So I'm just going to change it to BG Orange. And bada bing, bada boom. So you can also define your own custom CSS with Tailwind. So if we go down here, we have that background gradient running. And I'm just going to change this to like black. And then we'll just have to restart our reloading server. And I'm going to run a script that's develop. This is just doing the Tailwind building as well as starting Gatsby Develop. How many people have heard of Tailwind CSS? It's a really cool project. It's created by Adam Wathan. I'm a fan. I'm also not a mainstream kind of design type of person, so it's really handy for me. And now if we go back here, can reload it, we have a black background. So we also have this sample blog post here. It has a title, has a date, right? We kind of see this URL at the top. That's year, month, day, and then a slug. So if we go back to Visual Studio Code, we can actually see how that works. So here's 2018-0801, and then I'm writing all my blog posts in Markdown so that I can easily port them over to some other things. And so we have our front matter up here at the top, and then we kind of have our content down below. So let's just change the title of this. And we see that automatically changed. I didn't do the split view thing like Kyle, but it is very fast. So kind of how that's happening, like Kyle talked about, there's plugins for pretty much all kinds of sources. So I'm using the source file system, and it's essentially just sucking the files out of that pages directory, feeding them into transform or remark to then convert my markdown into HTML. Other things worth noting kind of in the starter project. So there's this social sharing component already built in. This is just using React Share behind the scenes. There's also an SEO component that's included in the blog posts that is just kind of doing your basic SEO stuff, and then setting up kind of your Facebook graph tags, your Twitter card summary, and all of that. So now we can go back to the command line. And if we run Gatsby build, this will create a production build for us and output it to my public directory. So now if we go into public, we see here's all of my static assets. So then what we can do is I have the AWS CLI installed, and so I can just do AWS S3 copy. I'm going to copy this in all these files to a bucket that I have called Gatsby, and then my domain. And I'm going to do recursive. And I also have multiple AWS accounts running on my machine, so I'll specify a profile. So this is going to take all of the contents of that public directory, put them in my S3 bucket. My S3 bucket's configured for static website hosting. I also have CloudFront sitting in front of it. So now if we go back here, go to Gatsby.kylegalbraith.com. There we see the site deployed. So to do that in AWS, I've included in this starter project the deployment pieces you need. So if AWS is fairly new to you and you're a little unsure, like feel free to grab me at the end of this, and I'm happy to help answer questions. So this is using a Terraform template that I created that's essentially just creating an S3 bucket that's configured for static website hosting, and then a simple CloudFront distribution, which is an Amazon-powered CDN. And I just have it output a CloudFront distribution domain, and then I can update my DNS records, point my blog at it, and we're off and running. So with that, again, like if you're learning AWS and static websites is your thing, I'm happy to talk about this course. You can also find me on Twitter if you have questions later. It's just at Kyle Galbraith. And just grab my name from the meetup. And I think that does it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kyle. And we're going to bring up our last speaker for tonight, and also the tallest man I've ever met in my life, Andrew Ryan. Andrew, you want to come on up and get this plugged in? All right, so you HDMI straight in? Okay. Plugged in. While you're doing that, I'm going to try to come up with another joke. I've run out of jokes. Who's got one? Nothing? What do you call a man with a shovel on his head? Doug. What do you call a man with a seagull on his head? Cliff. Oh, these are good. I feel like these could go for days. All right, you ready, Andrew? Just a second. Okay, one more. What do you call a man floating in the ocean? Bob. Now what?
Had to switch GPUs. So.
Oh, you had to switch GPUs. The joys of using fancy computers. What do we got? What else? What do you call a man lying in front of your front door? Matt. Can we come up with any other of these? I got nothing else. Okay.
Almost done.
Almost?
Almost done. Everything worthwhile takes time.
So while we're waiting for this to kick on, let's just do one more quick round of applause for our sponsors: Okta, Cloudflare, Alchemy Code Lab. Thank you all very much. And don't forget to stick around after Andrew's talk. Come over and see us on the left side of the room here to grab some swag and again grab a discount code if we don't have your size. You ready to go?
No, technical problem.
It's up there.
Oh, is it?
Are you just on a split screen?
Cool. Yeah. It put the login screen on the wrong screen.
You might want a mirror too, because it's just been a little goofy.
Yeah, just a sec.
All right, I think you got it. All right, I'm going to get out of the way. One more time for Andrew, everybody.
Well, this is special. Hello. So I'm giving a talk today on how we fetch data with Gatsby. A quick show of hands, who here has used Gatsby so far? Cool. So let me go ahead and pull all of my...
Scoot this way a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. Slides. So, cool. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Ryan. I am a cloud services engineer at Gatsby. Really, that's just a fancy word for someone who builds back-end things, really. So don't let the title seem more complicated than it really is. Cool. A couple more things I need to set up here real quick. Awesome. Yeah, wrong one. There we go. So in Gatsby, as most of you probably already know, we use GraphQL as our data fetching plane. So what that means is, like, if you build a normal website without GraphQL, usually what you're dealing with is making HTTP requests to a plethora, either your own backend or third-party data sources, or lots of other random places. And each one of these sources kind of has its own way of doing things. Some APIs will require header-based pagination. Other ones will use query strings. Some of them will return arrays as the global object. Other ones will embed the arrays 3 objects down. So you end up with like this kind of gnarly plethora of data sources and different ways of doing things. GraphQL kind of lets us do everything the same way. So instead of having to integrate with a lot of different APIs or a lot of different constraints, or even if you're using like microservices on your backend, rather than having to make a request to multiple API endpoints to grab lots of different pieces of data, instead you can make one trip to your backend, say exactly what you need, and get all of your data back. So as Kyle mentioned earlier, this makes it really easy to build static sites, because instead of having to write code and fetch data from a lot of different places with a lot of different protocols, we can instead just install a set of plugins, each plugin pointing to a different data source like Medium or Contentful or a plethora of other sources, and we can just fetch data that way. Hold on. Cool. So almost there. Awesome. Okay, so this is like a pretty basic sort of Gatsby config file. It's basically, we've installed one plugin for Gatsby, and this is just a plugin to grab things off of Pixabay, which is a little sort of free image service. Jason was kind enough, I believe, to build the plugin. Yep, so it's pretty cool. It's pretty easy to use, too. Before I go any further, does anyone hate Star Wars or puppies? No one? Okay, cool. Then we're good. Because there will be Star Wars and puppies in this presentation. So let me just boot this up, and we can actually sort of look at some puppies or something. Here we go. Talks, ones, oops. I don't know, step 1. Query. So I just need to clip. I'll just copy it. Hold on. Step 1. Query, boom. Yeah, so now that we've installed this plugin, which is all pre-assembled, unfortunately, we can just kind of use said plugin to look at some data. So I'm going to go ahead and start this very simple Gatsby like hello world project. Oh, what is this? Oh, yeah. And if we go to localhost, we'll see hello world. Oh, yeah, awesome. Localhost. Boom. Okay, so now if we want to actually fetch a picture of a... Can you make sure that fits in the window? Oh, can I? I don't know. Let's see. Pains of a new computer, I guess. Okay, there we go. So if we want to actually fetch data with Gatsby, we can use Graphical, which comes baked into Gatsby. And we can run a little simple query here to actually, well, sure. Pixabay photo, yeah, that's right. So we can actually fetch data from our Pixabay source. Edges, node. And this is going to return from the actual Pixabay API like a set of URLs that we can actually render. So as you can see, this is just like step 1. If you wanted like a GraphQL source, all you have to do is install a plugin. There's plugins for Medium, there's plugins for this service Pixabay, there's plugins for pretty much everything. Another cool thing we can do is actually stitch plugins from other, so we can actually stitch other GraphQL APIs like GitHub's API or Graph CMS's API into our GraphQL or into our Gatsby project pretty easily. To do that, we just add another plugin. And with this plugin, we're installing the Gatsby source GraphQL plugin right here. And we're just going to specify a type that this API will return. So we're going to call this swappy, because I guess that's a type. I didn't know. Star Wars API. Yeah, that's right. We're gonna call it in our query definition the swappy field, and we're gonna fetch swappy from this API below. So this is really all you have to do to stitch in another GraphQL API. If we go back to our browser. Can
you talk a little bit about what schema stitching is?
Yeah. So when you make a GraphQL operation to a backend, like a GraphQL server, usually the typical way is you'll have a big definition of all the different types that your API can serve. And when the GraphQL request gets processed by your GraphQL server, what it does is for every type, it makes an HTTP request or some sort of operation down to an underlying data source. That could be a database, Redis, Mongo, or it could be some other API. It doesn't really care. It just allows you to send one trip to from site to server, and then the server can multiplex that request and distribute it down to a lot of different data sources. Sometimes those data sources themselves support GraphQL. So schema stitching allows you to say, okay, there's another GraphQL API over here. The GraphQL specification sort of provides us for this thing called introspection, which basically means that if there's a GraphQL API, you can hit a meta API and say, what all do you provide? Like, what are your types? What are the fields on those types? How do the types interrelate? So with schema stitching, Gatsby hits the introspection API on a GraphQL source, and it tells Gatsby, here are all the fields I provide, and then when you write queries in your templates, it'll actually just forward that portion of the GraphQL operation onto the backend that supports that part of the GraphQL schema. So if we expand our little, Star Wars thing here, we can, oh, yeah, great. You can actually see more cool stuff from our GraphQL API. So we're going to go swappy, all files, title. And this is going to get us a list of Star Wars movies. So if we say swappy, let's let our server fully boot. So swappy. Oh, yeah, I do. You're right. Yep. All films, and we're going to get the title of every Star Wars movie. If we do this, now we'll have two different pieces of data. We'll have all of the titles of all of the Star Wars movies in this one field called swappy, which corresponds with this swappy piece right here. Then we have all files, which is an array, and then under every file, we have the title. And then if we go down here, again, all Pixabay photo, Edge, Node, and then the web format URL. So this is kind of boring. No one likes looking at data, so let's actually look at a picture of a puppy. That sounds a lot more fun than what I'm doing right now. Yeah. So the second step, we obviously have the same kind of thing in our config. We also have, well, let's step 3 index. We also have a little template. So is that all fitting? Yeah, cool. So on our template, we have a request for a Pixabay photo, which is going to return a dog. And we are going to request, along with the Pixabay photo, every Star Wars ID and title for every Star Wars movie. So if we refresh, there's your dog. And There's all your Star Wars pages. Now, if we click this right now, nothing happens. You get like a 404, which we should because there are no pages yet. So for my next trick, I will show you how to do something called page queries. So a page query is, well, let me take a step back actually. If we go back to step 3 and we look at the index file again, we can see that this is just one static GraphQL query. There are no, like, what happens if we want to actually, like, render a set of pages based on some variables, or if we want to pass some options in our query? We can do that with GraphQL. It's super easy, just like with REST. So static queries don't allow that. Static queries say you know exactly what you want to render one thing. That's useful for things like marketing landing pages, where you don't have like a set of things like you would with a blog post. You just kind of have one thing. And it may be backed by like a CMS where you want to tweak your marketing language and try to improve your funnel conversion rate. But if we want to like render a set of blog posts, we want to use page queries. So page queries are implemented a little differently. We have to write a new webhook, and this is just part of the Gatsby API. It looks for a file called gatsby-node.js, and it assumes that file exports potentially a set of functions. One of those functions is called create pages. This function gets called during the compile process when Gatsby is actually generating pages. So what we're going to do here is we're going to return a promise from this function, and that promise is going to invoke the GraphQL API for Swappy, fetching all of the film titles like we did before. And then for every film, we're going to create a page. So we're going to iterate across all of the pages, or all the films, and with each film, create a page. And that requires a template file, so let's look at that. So here's our template. So for every page, it's going to pass in as the GraphQL result this little fragment right here. And we're going to simply render out the title of the movie and the director. So oops. So here we're going to go ahead and see Gatsby render all the pages that we just specified. So you can see here it's actually running 10 queries instead of just like one. And that's because it's rendering like an additional query for every page that generates it. And we're also generating multiple pages, not just one, because it's rendering a page for every Star Wars movie. So if we go back and we refresh, we can actually click these now, and they actually go to a page. And these pages are rendered dynamically with content fetched from a GraphQL API. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. No, it wasn't super exciting. Sorry. Star Wars and puppies, not everyone likes them. Yeah, what's up?
So how does, behind the scenes, how is Gatsby actually doing this fetch?
So I believe, I'm still new to Gatsby and the team. I believe the way this works is we actually sort of queue up the different requests that we need to make as we process the pages. And then there's a step where we actually flush all of those out and grab the data that we need. And Kyle, I'm sure, can elaborate more on that.
Programmatically then controlled by the plugin. So the plugin will have access to whatever secrets you need to log into your CMS or whatever, right?
Yeah, usually you end up mapping those configurations in your config file. And those can in turn be mapped in via environment variables, or if you want, you can go like, interpolate them into environment variables from something like Vault. It really depends on your own sort of needs. Yeah, so this tends to involve, for people who are kind of rolling their own build infrastructure, a bit of yak shaving. And for people who aren't familiar with that term, it's just crap you have to do before you can be productive. So usually there's actually a thing called a refresh data webhook that's built into the Gatsby open source core. And if your data changes, if you have a server that's running builds, you can actually just hit that endpoint, and your plugins will automatically refresh and grab data sources from everywhere, diff it against the existing cache, and rebuild what's changed. Refresh I think it's just called the refresh endpoint, right? Yeah, if you're running develop, yeah. If you're not running develop, you just have to detect that and then run a build again. You do it with a webhook, yeah. And a lot of people use like a CI solution for this. You can, with Circle or Travis, you can actually cache your existing build cache, pop it back in, run the build on top of it, and you should be good to go.
I'll jump in with a really easy solution for this. So one of the ways that we've seen that's very easy to do this in production is if you have data that's going to update relatively frequently, like not up to the second, but maybe every few minutes, every hour or so, Netlify is a really good solution for this because they have webhook support. So what you would do is on your content layer, you can register a webhook, whether that's with something like Contentful or with really whatever you're using. Whenever your data changes, Netlify can trigger a build based on pretty much any webhook. So you register that webhook with them, and whenever it fires, they will rebuild your site. So as far as like getting your data up to date on the website, once you've configured that webhook, you kind of just get to forget about it because your site will rebuild anytime it changes. Well, the watcher is something that you would want in like when you're developing the site. Yeah. In production, you probably don't want to have the benefit of static sites is that you don't need long-running processes. Right. So it removes the need to have those long-running processes because it's all kind of push-based. Your content says, here's some new, we have something new, and then that just spins up Netlify long enough to build a new version of the static site, and then you still don't have any long-running processes.
That said, stay tuned. There might be something that removes the need to think about this at all.
Yeah, that's what Gatsby Inc., the commercial company, that's what we're going to be rolling out, is products to help with live preview. We're aiming to do things that will help you kind of build in real time. Lots of things that are coming down on the product roadmap, and we'll be sharing more details as they become more solidified in our own heads. Any other questions?
Yeah. So I don't want to, no one really does that anymore. That's actually older sort of relay standards.
It's graph theory. So yeah. in the original versions of GraphQL, it was very heavily based on graph theory, which is the idea that data is connected along edges, and at each edge are nodes that represent relationship. It's not used as often in like modern GraphQL, but Gatsby was at the very bleeding edge of GraphQL when it first became a thing. So it's something that is becoming less common. Like, when you schema stitch in, you won't see edges and nodes as often. I don't know, Kyle, is there a plan to move the Gatsby like internal creating nodes away from edges and nodes?
It's something we could certainly do.
To repeat that for the people on the stream, it's something that we could certainly do. We just haven't done it. So if you want us to do it, get into our issues. Come to github.com/GatsbyJS/Gatsby and tell us what you want. We're really interested in having you in our community. We're kind of moving toward the slogan like, you belong here. We want you here. We want to hear what you have to say, and we want you involved in the process. Absolutely. So please show up and come talk to us because we want to build things that you want to use. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I find most compelling about Gatsby is being able to website compilers, not necessarily the static site generator, but I don't have to think about what that guy version. And then it's really that's what I want to and what that means is I love Gatsby in a situation where I want dynamic routing, where I want a non-static API that I'm depending on. So there's great. But what I have is a one requirement where I need dynamic routing, so I guess I'm actually just that React.
No, you can use Gatsby for it. So the question was, can you do dynamic routing for Gatsby? And in fact, you can. If you look at our swag store at store.gatsbyjs.org, it is a Gatsby app that also has authentication, dynamic routing, live data, all that stuff. It's all open source, so it's on our GitHub page. It's /GatsbyJS on GitHub /store.gatsbyjs.org. Right. So you can find all that code, and there's an API for that. So you just whitelist one route on your app as being dynamic, and you can build full dynamic apps under that. Because once a Gatsby app spins up in the browser, it's not static files, it's a rehydrated progressive web app.
Yep.
So you've got all the flexibility of create React app or Next.js or any, well, kind of like Next.js, but it's putting a React app in the browser. So you can do all the same things, asynchronous data, authentication, custom routing, all that stuff.
When I was working on it months ago, that the router itself was pretty obscure. Simply in React router. But
Yeah, it was on React router. Yeah, what we moved to with Reach Router is I think even more friendly, simplified API. We're pretty excited about what V2 is going to do for making Gatsby capable of supporting dynamic apps in the browser.
awesome.
Any other questions? All right, y'all. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming. So, yes, please eat pizza. Yes. All right. So we're going to wrap up the live feed. Thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Okta, for supporting that live stream. And come talk to us over here.